Hello, my name is Haley Keel, and today I will be talking about high effect size and what that means. So, effect size is a way for educational researchers to kind of rank what strategies and practices in the classroom, what kind of impact they will have, whether it's a high impact or a low impact. So a good definition that I found was that effect size is used to determine the efficiency of an intervention or educational practice relative to a comparison group or approach. So what effect size kind of necessarily does is that it predicts the impact and the effectiveness that a strategy or a practice will have, and the size of the kind of effect it will have. And so when looking at effect size, anything from a 0.2 or below is going to be considered a small effect size. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad strategy or that it doesn't work. It just kind of really means that it just doesn't have an impact. So kind of an example of this was I saw that a teacher's gender it has a really low effect size, which isn't really bad. It just means that your gender isn't going to affect your classroom in terms of teaching. A 0.5 effect size is considered a medium impact, and then anything from a 0.08 or larger is going to be considered a high effect size. And so there's two big main researchers, Dr. John Hattie, I believe that's how you pronounce it, and Dr. Robert Mazzarno. And so the first one I'm going to talk about is Dr. John Hattie, and he studies intervention and educational practices that are the most effective. So, when looking at him, I saw that he had a list of the most effective and the least effective strategies and practices in the classroom. And there's quite a few, and some of the super factors that he has I thought were kind of interesting. The biggest super factor is teacher estimates of achievement, which has an effect size of 1.62. And so this basically just means teachers having a knowledge of the students and knowing their students more in depth and what their strengths and weaknesses are, and having an estimate of how students will do in certain subjects. Another one that I found really interesting was the collective teacher efficiency, which has an effect size of 1.57, and this is about teachers understanding that that they basically matter and that they have an impact on students' achievement, and it's not just if a student does bad or poorly, it's just, because of this or that. It's that even if there are things going on in the children's lives, that you do make an impact on their learning and how they succeed in school, which I thought was really interesting. And I read that it can actually triple the rate of learning, which I thought was another super interesting thing. I never really thought of a teacher's attitude as having such, I knew it made a difference, but I guess I never really realized how big of a difference it really makes. Another thing that I found interesting about Dr. John Hattie was that he put class size as an effect size of negative 0.5, which I guess I've always heard the opposite. I always heard that the smaller the class, the more effective teaching will be, and I know colleges definitely stress that when they're trying to get new students. They talk about their teacher-student ratio and how small their class size is. So I thought that was interesting, and I read that a lot of people disagreed with him on that. And then, so going on to Dr. Robert Marzano, I've heard of him before when learning about vocabulary instruction. He has the 6 steps on how to most effectively teach vocabulary. And he's also someone who studies instructional strategies and uses the effect size. And he has a list that I found that were the 9 effective instructional strategies, and most of them I thought were pretty, not very surprising. homework and practice is listed as number 4, the more he stressed that when teaching that it's really important for students to have a good amount of time to practice what they're learning, or else that it won't just stick with them. Setting objectives and providing feedback, he put as number 7. I definitely agree with that. And then another article that I found interesting on both of them was that it kind of took both of their research and kind of condensed it into what they both agreed on. And so the number one thing that they both agreed on was having a clear focus on the lesson, and kind of before you start the lesson stating what exactly that you want them to learn in the lesson, which I thought was very useful to know, and I can definitely see how that would work, of the students expecting what's going to happen, and it definitely creates kind of a structure for them. They know exactly what's going to happen. And then Marzano also strongly suggests to start the lesson by asking questions to activate prior knowledge, which is something that I've always learned with reading, and so I definitely agreed with that. Another one that I thought was interesting was that they both really agreed on giving feedback, and it's one of the best things that teachers can do, the most effective thing. And so it refers to giving specific things that you thought was good in their work, highlight the good and bad about the work, and help students see how they can improve. And something that I thought that kind of struck out to me was referring to specific things that are good. That's not only good for the students to know like what they're good at, but it also really improves their confidence and in their work. I worked at an after-school tutoring, and they really emphasized writing. So after they were done with their homework, they could write, and we were encouraged to help with their writing. And so something that they wanted us to do was not just that they asked us to look at their work, to not just say, oh, this was really good, I really, liked what it was about, but to actually read it and pick out certain things that you thought were really good and mention that to them, like, oh, I really liked these words I used, or I liked how you phrased that, or I really liked this character, because it shows that you really care and that you were really interested. And I know if an adult did that for when I was a child, that probably would have made me a lot more confident in my writing. I've always been really insecure about my writing, and so I thought about if I had an adult like say, oh, I really like this that you did, that would really be like, oh, like maybe I am a good writer. And so I thought that was not only good for giving feedback is not only good for helping students improve their work, but also just to build their confidence. And then another thing that they both stressed was offering overt instruction. So Marzano says that it's extremely important to explicitly teach students a topic, and he actually considered this the most important factor. And then they both agreed on giving examples when teaching. Hattie says that to give worked examples when explaining how to do multi-step tasks. So this is like in math, if you are going through something that involves steps, not to just list the steps and then have them work on practices on their own, but to not just list the steps, but take a problem and go through it with using examples. And then Marzano also agrees with using examples, like I said, but he stresses the use of examples and non-examples, which I thought was interesting. The example the article gave was using prime numbers to give examples of prime number, but then also non-examples to show that they said to show the differences between odd numbers and prime numbers, which I thought was interesting. And then another thing that I found was interesting, let me look at my notes, that they both agreed on was building student self-efficiency. And they talked about doing this by praise, being genuine about your praise, and referring to specific accomplishments. So that's kind of related to what I talked about with feedback. And I thought that was really, interesting that they considered this a high impact, that making students confident and self-efficient was considered really impactful in the classroom, and I thought that was really interesting. And also having students apply their knowledge, they considered that a very high impact. Marzano stressed deductive processes where students applied general principles to specific case problems, and it helps them generalize knowledge, which again I thought was interesting. I know I've said that a lot, but this definitely made me think about how important it is to research topics. There are some things that I never even would have thought of, or there's some things that I thought were useful that weren't, and so it definitely gave me kind of a reason to do more research. And that is it, and that's what I found.